Evolutionary.org Hardcore 2.0 is coming your way. This is episode 162. Today we're going to talk about, does Equipoise or NPP cause anxiety with Euro Pharma? So this is going to be a good one. We're going to talk about bro science and parroting and how it influences people. We're going to talk about wacky theories on both Equipoise and NPP that I was able to find around the internet and things that we've heard in gyms over the years. We're going to talk about how to use Equipoise and NPP in your cycles. And we're going to talk about Euro Pharma as a trusted brand. But first, let me just remind everyone, look, we're going to talk about, how bro science and parroting influences people. That's something on this podcast that we don't do. We don't parrot information. We don't spread bro science. We don't spread misinformation out there. And the world is full of marketing. It's full of all kinds of things. So it's very important to support the podcasts that are out there that are promoting the science and promoting the
Yes.
real stuff. And we're using our experience and our knowledge to share this information and not to even watch or listen to these other podcasts out there. So you may have found our podcast through the algorithm out there by
Yeah.
listening to some of these other ones. And the algorithms on all these social media sites all work in a certain way. So what they'll do is they'll put certain podcasts to the front of the line so that other
Yeah.
people listen to it. So look, bottom line is this. We're on evolution.org, but we're also on Spotify and we're on Apple. And it's very, very important for those of you out there, if you enjoy our podcast, to support our podcast. And you can support our podcast by liking, by commenting, by giving us a review, by doing all those things. This way, the algorithms can pick us up more and we can grow the channel and reach more people. That's very, very important so that people out there are getting the quality information. And look, at the end of the day, it's just like anything else. 95% of realtors suck. 95% of accountants sucks. 95% of auto
Yeah.
mechanics suck.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
it comes to these bodybuilding podcasts, 95% of them suck. But unfortunately, the top bodybuilding podcasts that get the most views out there,
Mm.
they suck because they are clickbait, because they parrot
Yes.
information and they
Yes.
it's just marketing and they buy
Yes.
followers and all that stuff. We don't do any of that stuff. So even though we have 50,000, 75,000 views for our podcast on the website, within 2 weeks of our episodes, we get a lot of views. We still need your help if you're listening to us or you're not on Apple or you're not on Spotify. So I like to drive, Mobster. I'll put up Apple or Spotify in my car and I will listen to those our podcasts on while I'm driving. So that's a great idea for those of you out there to kind of support our podcast.
Yeah. We know listeners via the forums that talk about listening to these shows when they do cardio. We know specifically our fertility and our addiction episodes have been incredibly well received. I mean, I think I actually said something to the effect of, Steve, if we help one person, we've done a great job. Hopefully, we help more, of course. We want our podcast to be timeless. We talked about this when these shows were being put together, so that you can come back and the information we give you is solid, and it's solid gold now, and it's solid gold 5, 6 years down the road. If stuff needs updating, we will come back and do a new podcast and make sure that the information we give you is relevant and up to date. Today is a great example, Steve, I think, of us trying to actually think and talk about logic and talk about the methodology of actions, etc., versus the parroting of information, versus the bro science, and versus, I think, as Steve said, the clickbait traction type titles that grab your eye, give you attention, make the algorithm work, but don't actually provide you with the information that you need when you're using these products, when you're looking at Euro Pharmacies, and trying to make decisions about which way you're going to go, what you're going to stack, what you're going to cycle, and as specifically today, whether or not you might, as an individual, and we're going to delve deep into that, have particular issues when using certain products, when using certain PEDs, and even things like, if you do, how to sort of mitigate that, and so on and so forth. So you won't get that on some shows. What sells, Steve, is gossip. The bullshit that doesn't actually add muscle sells more in bodybuilding and these kind of shows than the actual information that you really, really want to know. What's going to put a quarter of an inch on your arm? What's going to make your abs pop? How to diet? How to train? That's what you really want to know, because that's what's going to help you in the gym and then at the kitchen table and so on. So yeah, definitely show us some love, subscribe, share with your friends, let them know what we're doing, and fingers crossed, guys, you'll help us to grow and help even more people like yourselves. Back to you, Steve.
So why don't we start off, Mobster? You're telling me on the pre-show about a story about EF. Why don't you talk about? Let's let the viewers know about that story.
Yeah, look, so and this probably applies to what we're talking about today, Steve, in terms of how people sometimes think and feel and so on and so forth. So I have been reading a biography by Mary McFadden, who was the wife of the famous around the World War II. She was married to Bernard McFadden, and Bernard McFadden was amongst other things, he had a massive magazine empire, Steve, back in the day. You probably don't even know. A lot of bodybuilders, myself included, when I first come to this, wouldn't know. But it was in the millions. He was making millions of dollars in 1946. So, so in Mary's biography, there was a great section, a little paragraph or two, where she was talking about Bernard's great ideas. And that's kind of symbolic of what we're talking about today. Bernard tried to kind of reinvent so many things associated with bodybuilding and a few other things. He came up with some weird way of doing ventilation for buildings, Steve, probably prefacing air conditioning and so on and so forth. And he would submit these ideas to the patent office. And the patent office actually had guidance, sound as you like, basically in the 1930s and 1940s. Page 1 said something along the lines of, just because something has occurred to you doesn't mean that your idea is unique. It may well be that you've been influenced by an idea that you've seen already. And I think that kind of ties in with what we're talking about today. Bernard, of course, was so arrogant, I even recognize some of his attributes of myself, that the idea that we were somehow unique, possibly in personality and hair and outlook and so on and so forth, is fine. But when it came to the patents, he was low. He probably submitted several hundred, Steve, but the great and vast majority were thrown out because they were either rubbish, just ridiculous, didn't work or whatever else, and he hadn't given them any thought, or literally he was only thinking of something that would have been thought of. And what we're looking at here today, and kind of tying in with the first subject, Steve, is the influence of seeing something online. Now, we know this happens in social media. We know it happens with Facebook. We see stories go around. People will literally not look something up. They see something that they believe. They see something that they want to believe, and they parrot that information, Steve. Whether it's racism or political, financial, even I saw a 5-minute reel yesterday, and it was to do with one of those capsules that's just been come down from space. And they'd edited so the video looked like she'd been pushed out of the capsule by a person, but the video made you believe, and the person doing the voiceover, an AI voice, said, how come there's someone inside? It has to be fake. In reality, there's a longer video where you actually see the person on the ship that has caught the capsule out of the sea go into the capsule and help her out of the capsule. So it was deliberately made to make you think all these kind of things are fake. When it comes to EQ and to a lesser degree NPP, Steve, people could read things and believe it without it necessarily being true. They don't understand methodology of action. They don't understand that, for example, when they're using certain products like EQ, the simple fact of the matter is it was designed when it was being used by horses to improve the performance of a racehorse. And racehorses are kind of skitterish. They're relatively lean compared to, say, for example, a working horse. So they're lean and they're vascular and muscular. And we as bodybuilders go, that's amazing. But your way that you deal with stress changes from when you're fat and comfortable to when you're lean and ripped and vascular, and when you're dieting and when you're training incredibly hard. The methodology of action, and we've got some suggestions here, Steve, about changing brain chemicals. How? How does a steroid change a brain chemical? There's an argument, for example, with regards to trend. I've actually seen a study mentioned online, but not with EQ. So is it one of those things sometimes where literally what you've read has influenced how you thought about something, and you haven't actually gone away, given it any actual proper thought? You haven't applied the thought logically, and you haven't looked up the research to see if such research even exists to prove the point. And another one, a good example here, Stephen, you and I have discussed this on other shows, is dosaging. The dosaging of a product, I bet as bodybuilders, we use per pound or per kilo vastly more per pound or per kilo than they give to horses. We know for a fact that steroids, the way that we use it for performance enhancement, is above and beyond, with one or two exceptions, the dosages that are given to patients medically. And so obviously certain things are going to work in a particular way. But I'm going to give you an example, Steve. If I was dieting down as a bodybuilder for a competition, the way that I feel on a day-to-day basis, the stresses that I deal with would be different. It's not complicated. Dieting would make me hungry, it might make me irritable, I might be low on carbs, I might be cutting in the last 2 days for a competition, I've pushed my body incredibly hard. Of course I'm going to think differently. Of course I'm going to be more grumpy, more hard to get on with. Of course I'm almost certainly going to have to apologise for my partner for what an arsehole I've been for the last couple of weeks. And that would be me doing my absolute best not to make that happen, telling them that I might be a bit grumpy, a bit irritable, and so on. So you're going to use a product that helps you get into shape, and in getting into shape, you might well change your mood. You'd do that even if you wasn't using EQ or NPP. And definitely the dosages, the body condition of the person using it. So, for example, someone who's obese should have a different sentiment or feeling or effect from, say, EQ again, versus someone who's already kind of in shape. So you have to think about how those things work. When I'm in hard training for competition, Steve, as I used to be, those last 2 weeks were fucking awful. And I'm not even a bodybuilder. So talk a little bit about the influence, the way that social media and reading things online, including the parroting of bro science, can make people get an idea that perhaps isn't true.
Yeah, and you can go to any sort of forum on the internet and you'll see people push a certain belief. So an example I'll bring, with sports. People will call a certain team or a player soft, and then others are going to parrot it as a fact. But the people who started that theory, they never even put on a jockstrap in their life, and they're calling this player a soft or this team a soft. But so they're suddenly experts on who is soft and who is tough because they post on the forum every day. They have thousands of posts. They might have some sort of power on that particular forum where they're a moderator and they can kind of push their beliefs on people. And then if you disagree with them, you'll have 20 other guys step in and say, no, you're wrong, you're an idiot, blah, 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 blah. So it's the same thing on sports forums. It could be on a fishing forum. It could be on anything, any hobby that you're into. You go on the forum and it's going to be the same thing. So I've talked about this before. Facebook, for example, absolutely horrible to be on Facebook. Why? Because I can go on Facebook and I can say that Equipoise causes anxiety, and I have 50 people the next day respond saying, oh, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. And then the next day I can post, Equipoise does not cause anxiety. And guess what will happen, Mobster? I'll have 50 people come and say, oh, no, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. So you
Yeah.
see the point? The point is, when it comes to social media, there's a problem. It's called TMI, too much information, and it's also called
Yeah.
a bunch of people who think that they're experts because
Yes.
they read someone else's Facebook who
Yeah.
says a certain theory, so that now that makes them an expert. And we see this all the time. How many of you have relatives, okay, who are wannabe doctors? So you'll have, a relative in the hospital, they have something wrong with them, they're sick, and you'll have some relative call you up that you haven't talked to in like 20 years and be, oh, you should give them this supplement, or you should give them this treatment, or you should feed them this diet. Suddenly they're experts. They're doctors,
Hmm.
mobster. These
Yeah.
people are doctors.
They
And
read they read they read an article once in a gossip magazine and now they're
or yeah,
experts.
or they read something on Facebook
Yeah.
about oh, you shouldn't give them this medicine. This medicine causes this side effect. Like they're expert. They know more than the
Steve, the
doctors.
algorithm for some of these things is worse because let me use this as an example. Google, let's imagine that I decide to think that the moon is made of cheese and I don't even ask it as a question. I Google the moon is made of cheese. So what Google would throw up is all the other people that agree or think the moon is made of cheese. Then for the next 1 or 2 weeks, even if I'm not Googling cheese made moon references, I'll get suggestions on YouTube and I'll get suggestions on Facebook, etc. There's a cheese moon page on Facebook. Would you like to join? That's the way algorithms work. It literally supports it's remembered your searches. You might have actually changed your mind, but it's still giving you suggestions. So when we've all been stressed, and I'm not going to say the word on this show for a certain viral issue that happened a few years ago and required immunization and so on and so forth, the information that some people search for, I can give you one example, Steve, and this is just how crazy it was. Person in question is a care home nurse, meaning she looks after old people. And she must have come across one relating to the face mask that everybody was going crazy over for 5 minutes. And she started to talk about carbon nanotube particulates. So one particular company developed a kind of face mask for nursing and doctor use in surgery, etc., that had a carbonized filter using the new technology of carbon nanotubes. And the idea was that this would be even better at filtering out face bacteria and germs, etc., during surgery. And so the suggestion being that particulates of the carbon would somehow get into the tube and you'd be breathing that in. And that's blah, 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 virus, blah, 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 blah. I'm hanging on, right. This person was on minimum wage. Literally, her day job is, look, I'm going to be crude here, wiping old people's asses, wiping their noses, wiping their chins, helping them to eat, helping them to the shower, helping them to the toilet. It's a worthy job, Steve. Absolutely. Doing it for minimum wage is awful. They should be paid more. But it does not, by any stretch of the imagination, make you an expert in carbon nanotube technology and filtering processes in face masks. It does not. So she's gone off, she's read this, it's reinforced an idea. Literally, darling, your day job is about being clean and healthy. So you don't give your bacteria, you don't give your viruses to the patients and vice versa. You don't catch anything from them. So she would literally have to keep herself clean, wear gloves, wear aprons, and probably wear a face mask for years. That suddenly it became an issue. And this was a big deal. Lots of people went crazy and lost their kind of minds over it. It's all quieted down now. You don't see much of this anymore because we're on the other side and it's not that big of a deal. And most of it's unproven. But the searching, the quote unquote research, which would be basically going on Google, going onto a forum or on Facebook, Steve said, reinforced that idea again and again and again to the point of stupidity. Whereas in her specific case, or without getting into the intricacies of other aspects, no fucking logic, no science, no proof whatsoever. But it looked good on paper, it looked good online, and it made a person that's doing a perfectly decent job that does not require any kind of real qualification, is paying the least that the government will allow a company to pay by law, sound like an expert. So I'm not going to call her stupid, but it kind of feels like that, Steve. And that's how sometimes this stuff works.
Well, when it comes to anabolic steroids, it's very easy to trick people into believing anything. And why is
Yes.
that? Because what happens is you'll parrot something. You could parrot something in someone's head and say, "Oh, equipoise causes anxiety. Equipoise causes anxiety," and then they'll run equipoise and get anxiety because
Yeah.
it's like a placebo effect. It's literally
Yeah.
a placebo effect, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. But Mobster brought up the point in the pre-show. What happens if something happens when you're on cycle, which causes you actual anxiety? You're gonna
Yes.
blame the equipoise for that? No.
Let me
I
touch
mean,
on that very briefly, Steve. Sorry. So one of the things that's happened in recent years, and social media arguably is actually part of that as well, Steve said, is that we, as a society, quite literally measured, and there is science to back this up, data to back this up, have become more anxious overall about things that arguably, Steve, my generation wouldn't give a moment's notice to. And I usually said to Steve in the pre-show, things that you're supposed to be anxious over are, and this is a very short list, there's a much longer list, and people will have certain things that trigger them. But let me give you an obvious example. And this is an average, typical Joe or Jane type response versus individual. So I'm not going to negate other people's sentiments. But as an example, going for a job, literally applying for a job, your job interview, you should be anxious. You should have butterflies. Asking your significant other, male, female, carrot, donkey, whatever, to marry you should make you anxious. The first time you've learned to be a pilot, you've done all the pilot training, now you're flying solo, should make you anxious. trying to pass your driving test should make you anxious. For a lot of people, having your first child should make you anxious. You should absolutely have a sentiment of feelings of anxiety, butterflies, adrenaline. That getting into a fight, the fight or flight syndrome should make you anxious. The idea, for example, that some people, and this is, I would argue perhaps that we've all struggled with this at some point, Steve, so-called standing in front of a crowd to do a speech or run a business conference should, for some people, make them anxious. But there are things now that we make ourselves anxious over or call what we feel anxiety when it's not. And PEDs can do this quite often, a lot, especially the stimulant types. So you don't have adrenaline pumping, you don't have cortisol flooding into your system. There is no reason for you to want to run away. You shouldn't actually be scared or have sentiments or feelings of anxiety. What you might be feeling is your blood moving quicker, your heart racing, specifically on stimulants. When you're on certain kinds of testosterone and certain PEDs, tren is a great example, Steve, which actually does arguably change how the brain thinks. So we'll touch on that briefly. Make you feel different. We've talked about TRT. We recorded a show just yesterday. We were talking about TRT. Tuesday, not to yesterday. Today's Thursday. And we said how for some people going back onto testosterone, having testosterone replacement therapy or HRT for women can be transformative. It can change your life. It could make you feel young again. So there's a sense of how we respond to hormones. But actual anxiety, you're not asking anybody to get married. You're not piloting a plane. You're not doing your driving test. You've just got a sense of how testosterone is flooding around your body. You've got, if example, with certain stimulants and pre-workouts, they're designed to make you feel that particular way. I've taken beta-alanine, Steve, and that gives you paresthesia, which is the tingling of your nerve endings. It only lasts a few minutes. If I didn't know what the fuck that was, I might freak out and have an anxiety attack. But in reality, that's what it's supposed to do. That's how it's supposed to make me feel. That's why it helps me in the gym if I use it. That's not me having a panic attack. That is literally me using a chemical, a supplement, an ingredient to create a specific effect that makes me feel a certain way. So there's an argument here when it comes to BDs and specifically EQ and NPP that when you're dieting, when you're trying to get in shape, they might make you feel a certain way. But is it actual anxiety? No, I would argue not. It might feel a little bit like that. It might have the symptoms of that. But once you understand that's exactly what it's supposed to do, this is exactly how you're supposed to feel,
Yeah.
you should become kind of comfortable with the sensation because you know it's working. You know it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
And another big reason why people, in this are so confused on anabolic steroids and listening to these people is that the people that are the gurus and the experts on anabolic steroids, because it is a black market industry, they're not
Yep.
professionals, they're not doctors, they're dumb meatheads in reality. Like if you go online and you search for information on anabolic steroids and you try to find something on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram or anything, you're gonna run into some dumb meathead, no education, really doesn't have experience. A lot of these pro bodybuilders that we see, they don't even know what they're taking. They just do what their coach tells them to do. The coach will tell them, "Hey, or
Yes.
take this, take this, take this." They don't even actually know their dosing or anything.
Yep.
So what we're seeing is we're trusting the people out there who have the biggest muscles or who can throw a football the furthest.
Yep.
And these are literally the worst people you can listen to when it comes to this because they themselves don't even know what they're doing. That's why they have coaches. So let's get into wacky theories on equipoise that are
Yeah.
reaches.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
spent some time looking up around the internet at some of these theories that I've seen, and they're very, very ridiculous. And the first one that I saw was someone claims that equipoise gives you anxiety because it strips the brain of its natural chillers like GABA. And
Ah,
just that line, it strips the brain of its natural chillers. Like, dude, really? That's that.
yeah. Yeah.
Like, can you
Yeah.
imagine
They
some?
couldn't even name. They couldn't even name what it is they're talking about. So they made up a phrase, Steve.
Yeah.
Look,
Can you imagine
and
like a
that,
Nobel
yeah,
Prize winner like saying
serotonin, endorphins. No, you're not
they
getting none of
calling
that,
it
baby. You're taking
chillers?
EQ.
But look,
Yeah.
GABA is a neurotransmitter
Yep.
transmitter in our brain. And you know what inhibits GABA? Caffeine. And how many of you out there drink caffeine every morning?
Oh God,
80% or
yeah,
85% of Americans in Northern Europe, it's over
mm,
90%, it's probably 95%. So you're inhibiting your GABA by drinking caffeine. So
yeah.
we're gonna blame Equipoise for inhibiting GABA when you yourself you're taking
But it's
drinking
even
coffee.
that say it strips the brain, meaning it removes all of whatever it is that makes you feel good. Well, so that's got to be rubbish right there. If that was actually true, can you imagine how this would work? Number one, you'd be panicking all day long. So that's rubbish. Number two, let's flip it around. Let's imagine that it encouraged chilled, chilled natural chillers in the brain. Imagine it did. You wouldn't want to go to the gym. I can't be bothered to go to the gym. You would if you was in a car crash. Oh, look at me, I'm in a car crash. I want to marry my wife. I'll ask her tomorrow. You'd be so fucking chilled, you'd get nothing done. So the idea that it strips you of the natural chillers, which would put you in constant anxiety, you'd be responding to, oh, there's no baked beans in the supermarket. I'm gonna have to go on a rampage. If it completely stripped your inhibitors, or if it completely stripped your chillers, as this person calls it, your responses to pretty much every situation ever would be so far one way or the other, it'd be ridiculous. So obviously, it's patently untrue. Let me give you another one, Steve. And this kind of silly insofar as it applies to all steroids to some degree, causes a rise to hematocrit. Steve, talk about what steroids, anabolic steroids, and P does to your hematocrit. Generally speaking, never mind specifically to
Well,
EQ.
let me touch on the first point first as well. So, if you were going to actually prove this logic that equipoise strips the brain of GABA, you'd have to come off all the stimulants that you're taking and then gradually increase your GABA back to where it should be. Now, if you're a person who we all have relatives and older relatives that drink a lot of caffeine. There, and you have to drink more and more caffeine as you get older. Some like people in their 70s are drinking like 7 or 8 cups of coffee a day. But you'd have to come off all the pre-workouts. You have to come off anything that has caffeine in it, and then you'd have to test it out. And I highly doubt, and I could guarantee you that Equipoise would not strip your GABA. I can guarantee it. There's absolutely zero way that that's even possible, as Mobster said. So, but by all means, try it out and test it for yourself. But I highly doubt that's going to happen. I've used Equipoise, did not happen with me, and I don't drink any caffeine. So, I mean, look, I mean, I can what can I tell you? Now, another one, hematocrit. Now, hematocrit is one of those things where if you're even on a little bit of extra testosterone, let's say you're on TRT and you're just on a little bit too much TRT, like you're on 150 milligrams a week, okay? You can get high hematocrit just from that. That's a thickening of your blood, right? And that's because these anabolic steroids, that's what they do. That's why they were used originally for a lot of them for anemia. And
Yeah,
for obviously they're used for muscle wasting as well, but anemia is a big
yeah,
one, and that's the idea. You want it to have a rise in red blood cell count. So as Mobsters was making his point,
yeah.
is that
It applies to all steroids
yeah,
that we use.
yeah,
All.
all steroids, unless they're extremely weak or
Yes,
mild
yes, yes.
options, or if you're using them at a really
Very
low
low
dose,
dosage.
are
Yeah,
going
yeah.
to cause a rise in it. So this kind of
It's not specific to EQ, and it's not the reason why you might have
it
anxiety,
probably
Steve.
started with some smart ass who used equipoise and he went and got his blood work done. He's like, oh,
Yes,
my hematocrit is
yes,
high, but he didn't
yes.
test his blood work when he was on other steroids. So, you're so if you're gonna equipoise does not cause more of a rise in hematocrit than if you were to use 500 milligrams of tren or 500 milligrams of testosterone versus 500 milligrams of equipoise. Show me the proof that equipoise is any worse than those two, and you're not.
Yes,
I can
yes.
believe that it's going to be worse than Primo or Masteron or some of these other mild steroids that are out there that are much weaker and not
Yeah, yeah.
as androgenic, but it's not going to be any worse than tren or testosterone. So the blood work doesn't lie.
No.
The other,
EQ
yep.
EQ stops testosterone from binding. Let me address this. What number one? What the fuck is EQ? A derivative of testosterone, so that's kind of weird, but whatever. One assumes they're talking about if you, and I say assumes because this is just all we've got to work with. EQ is quite often stacked with testosterone. So EQ stops testosterone from binding. Okay. Well, on that basis, no one would stack any steroid ever. We'd only ever run a singular steroid at one time, let that come out of our system, then run the next steroid, and so on and so forth. I think this has been used in other examples, Steve, where somehow if you dose one slightly higher than another one, the first one blocks the second one. So if I pull it up sustenance in my syringe, and then I pull up EQ, which one goes into my system? I mean, come on, guys, look, the ratios is probably more important. If you got running loads and loads of EQ and very little testosterone, you're probably going to get a different effect than, and again, it's individualistic anyway, than you would if you run them exactly the same, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, that's Steve. The idea that it stops, and again, stops is kind of a positive, really powerful word. One might argue, if one wanted to argue the point, that it might somehow negate slightly the effects of testosterone. And again, that's assuming that everything is equal in terms of dosage, time in the system, and so on and so forth. It's kind of like so restrictive in the phraseology, as if they say, right, we're taking EQ, any testosterone you use is going to have no effect whatsoever. Well, obviously that's cobblers. It has to be cobblers. Just as an example, I think I've seen analogies similar to this, Steve, where people talking about certain things. And I responded by saying, some of the stuff that you're talking about is the stuff that we believe today, i.e. bro science, not necessarily actually true. If it was true, how the fuck did we build any muscle in previous to anabolic steroids? How the hell did we build any muscle during, quote unquote, the golden age of bodybuilding in the 1970s, when Arnold and the others didn't have access to all the steroids that we have to today? How come today, when we've got more access to steroids, easier access to steroids, cheaper steroids than we've ever had at any point through history, as it's still the genetic freaks that are growing the most amount of muscle? Not everybody that uses steroids, including golden age type stacks, looks like Arnold, looks like Franco, looks like Lou Ferrigno. So the idea that certain things block, no, I don't think EQ blocks anything. And again, just as an example, let's use Equipoise as a horse steroid. Let's use that example. What if the horse is on antibiotics? For what if the horses receive another hormones? What's the point of spending thousands of dollars on my stud racehorse that's going to win the Grand National in this country, Steve, or some fantastic $100,000 cup in your country in America, if I've got EQ in my horse's system, which will probably be banned, but that's by the by, versus any other hormones or antibiotics or whatever else I've got the horse on, which may be prescribed for the horse by a vet. So the idea that certain steroid would block another steroid, I don't see the science here again, Steve. So how do you think that works with people?
I have no idea, buddy. I mean, again, these are just theories that people throw out there that, to pretend that they're like experts. Another one is it aromatizes to estrone, which
Yep.
causes testosterone to not do anything. And again, this can be proven wrong by getting blood work done. So we don't even need
Yeah.
to debate this. Like, go get blood work done and prove this. But the person who said this never even got their blood work done or anything. So they're just like throwing something
Is,
out there.
is this one up there, Steve, with if you crush your estrogen, then testosterone or all anabolic steroids will work better? The reality is we need a small amount of estrogen for most cycles, but a small amount. What we don't want is the body running away with it. So again, it's the idea that EQ somehow causes testosterone to not do anything because it's aromatized into something else. No. There's other things going on at play. It might well be that some individuals went into the cycle obese, with way too much body fat, with pre-existing estrogenic issues, and then they took EQ, and it made them feel a certain particular way, and they got worse. Or is another example, Steve? It wasn't EQ. How many times have we seen in the past where these ideas probably come from, where a person was taking a steroid and it turned out not to be what they thought it was because they were being scammed or it was fake and so on. So again, it's probably someone blaming how they've turned out with a poor diet and piss poor training and pre-existing issues on the EQ. My testosterone must have transformed into estrogen. That's why I'm a fat bitch tit fucker.
I've seen a lot of posts. The next one is you get very anxious and get anxiety. I've seen a lot of people say this when people are talking about equipoise. You'll have someone chime in and say this. Oh, but you shouldn't use
Yeah.
equipoise. You get very anxious and get anxiety. They don't say I got very anxious and I got anxiety. They say you will. So what
Yes.
happens with these is that we saw this back in the day, the old EF forum, which was very, very old, and it came around the time where very few people knew really the science behind a lot of these anabolic steroids, and they'd come up with these theories, or they would parrot these theories. So it's probably just one
Yeah.
guy who ran Equipoise. He had some life traumatic event happen. Maybe
Yes.
his
Yes.
wife
Yes. Yes.
served him with divorce papers during his cycle, and he's like, "Oh, I got
Well, we
anxiety."
go for his exams at college, Steve, and blames it on the EQ when it's.
Yeah. So then he says
Look,
it
yeah,
on the forum, and then these other parodies start doing it. So we had a guy on the forum. I'm not gonna mention his name, but you know who I'm talking about, Mobster. He used to do this all the time. Like he had literally no experience with steroids. He probably
mm.
used like Primo like once, like 10 years ago. But he was like a fucking guru on this shit because he knew how to fucking type and he spent his life on the forum.
I
So
know who
he
you mean.
so he started saying equipoise causes anxiety, and it's like, motherfucker, did you ever use equipoise? No, I never used it. I won't use it because it's a horse steroid, which is another myth, by the way.
Yep.
But it's like, dude, then why the fuck are you telling other people that it causes anxiety when you never even used it? And you yourself are a person who has anxiety. You are a fucking mental case with
Yes.
anxiety.
If we questioned him, he'd get stressed. If
Yeah,
we said,
exactly.
"Have you
Yeah.
got research to back up what you've said? Have you got experience to back up what you said? Have you actually run the PED in question?" No, and then he would get stressed and act like we was all ourselves or something. Look, if I come out with this, I used this analogy yesterday, Steve. I said, look, if I was that way inclined, and I was referring to someone that was talking about strength training, I said, look, the reason why you respond to what you do and the way you look, the way that you do, and feel the way that you do is because you do a similar kind of training to myself. However, the idea that my kind of training would work for everybody else is bullshit. That is super arrogant. So sometimes what happens is we don't even like to be questioned. Who the fuck are you? I've been doing this for 40 something years, blah, 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 blah. Listen, Steve and I do these shows. And I think I actually came into the shows when we first started doing it a little bit set in my ways. But I've actually changed my mind. Steve's changed my mind on certain particular things. I said, because it made no sense the way that I was thinking. I knew I was fucking wrong. And so you go, oh, well, I've learned something. That's how life should be. It's very easy to get stuck. And I say this as an old motherfucker in certain particular mindsets and so on. And I'm sure I'm still guilty of that in some regards. But the idea that some of these things is true or untrue and can't be questioned is rubbish, Steve. Let me do another one. You should run equipoise equal to testosterone or it will break your dick. I'm going to let you run with this one, Steve, before I start laughing.
I saw this one on an Instagram. It was like one of those Instagram shorts, and it was a couple meathead bodybuilders who were just like debating equipoise, and I just laugh at this one. This is the most dumbest theory out there. Look, plenty of people have used equipoise, including me. I've used it a lot. It's probably my favorite injectable,
Yeah,
and I've used it with more. I've used it at a dosage higher than testosterone. I've used it
yeah,
without testosterone.
yeah,
If my dick didn't get broken. All right. So there's lots of things out there that can break your dick.
yeah.
Okay. Lots of
So to
things.
speak. So to
Running
speak.
Clomid 300 milligrams a day, which a
Yes.
lot of people recommend, can break your dick. There's a lot of things that can break your dick out there, but this has got to be the dumbest idea. So again, this is a placebo belief where the person probably ran it and they already had erection issues from poor
Yeah.
lifestyle or
Steve,
age.
something that occurs to me and specific to the next one as well, right? Is that we somehow assume that when a person's taking performance enhancing drugs, when it's using steroids and training and on these diets and doing all the things that we do and refer to on these shows, didn't come into that with pre-existing anxiety, didn't come into that with pre-existing mental issues, doesn't have life stresses going on. None of that could be true. So, for example, the idea that it breaks your dick. What if you're going through divorce, like Steve referred to earlier on? What if your girlfriend or partner is an absolute fucking bitch? What if they're fucking trying to break your balls every single day while you're on your queue? So the idea behind that, and the next one, I'll read this one out as well, Steve, because that one was properly laughable. Woke up with heart racing and paranoid while on EQ for 4 months. Well, okay. What about 3.5 months? What about 2 months? So perhaps they did run it too long. What about, for example, the paranoid thing? The only steroid, I say the only steroid because some of the others, but the one I can think of which is specifically seen to affect, and the people this particular study see was older gentlemen, my age or older, that were being given low dose tren for specific medical ailments. So they were actually being prescribed and under doctors, etc., etc. And it was supposed to change the brain chemistry. But here's the classic, and this ties in with the last one and this particular one. So how many times have we seen, we've actually dealt this with on another show, the whole roid rage thing. And number one, it's been used as an argument in court. Number two, it's never, to the best of my knowledge, Steve, to date, and I'm talking about probably the last 20 or 30 years, actually been proven to be an actual thing that was useful as a defense in court. There's plenty of examples of it being used, but none of them actually kind of played out. So the void rage thing, generally it goes thus. Those of us that use steroids will agree that if you're placid before, you might become ever so slightly less placid on. If you were a complete and utter arsehole before, constantly getting into trouble, constantly doing stupid shit, constantly having fights in the supermarket, in the bar, in the street, in your car, and so on and so forth, then using steroids is probably going to make you more of an arsehole. But it doesn't change the placid person into an arsehole, and it doesn't make the arsehole into a placid person. It just perhaps enhances certain attributes of your personality, but you're not somehow transformed. So, for example, I woke up with heart racing. You might have had a fucking nightmare. Who hasn't woke up from a nightmare? I was falling. I woke up just before hitting the ground. Oh my God, boom, 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 boom. Paranoid. About what? Did you start seeing things? Do you think mushrooms are houses? It doesn't change how you think. And the argument for that to being true kind of seems a bit silly. Like I said, I suspect that person may have already been paranoid. A great example, and I'm not a fan one way or the other, Steve, but cannabis has been proven, and I'm just talking about recreational use, for those that have pre-existing or might be prone to mild psychiatric schizophrenia to exacerbate that. Most users don't get that. So it's a few percentage of users. So the percentage here might be the same. You might have been prone to paranoid or delusional thoughts. And perhaps, and I use this word very loosely, it might have made that slightly worse. But equally, again, think about the fact that you're dieting, trying to get in a straight, restricting your diet, eating certain foods, not eating other foods. You might have stuff going on in life, like Steve said. Listen, I've had my head up my arse, as I put it, mental, whatever you want to call it, back in 2011, Steve. And I guarantee you that I woke up fucking anxious and paranoid in the mornings because I was really, really, really pissed off with whatever the fuck was going on. EQ had nothing to do with it. So, again, if that's going on in your life, maybe going on anabolics. We've even said this a few times on the forum, Steve. When people have come on, we say, look, number one, you have other choices. Number two, perhaps it's not for you right now. This is the reason why we encourage users to be slightly older rather than younger. It's the reason why we might say, listen, you got so much shit going on, motherfucker. We've got your back in terms of whatever the fuck's happening to you in your life, because that is horrible. You just had a death in the family. Your cat got run over. What the fuck? Maybe leave off going on a cycle and getting into shape for a few weeks until you get your head right, until you calm the fuck down and deal with whatever's happening. So this can sometimes be what's happening. The simple fact of the matter is, when it comes to the bro science and stuff like this, Steve, we take it in isolation. We don't see what else is going on with that person's life, with how they feel, with how they're dealing with stuff. They might be getting really pissed off at work. They might want to change jobs. As you said before, you might want to be going for a divorce. One of your kids might be ill. Really crazy, fucked up shit. It's got nothing to do with steroids. Let's move on to NPP, Steve. I'll let you start this one.
Yeah, and the first one is I got banned anxiety after 6 weeks. It's another one that I found. Look, at the end of the day, after 6 weeks, you're getting anxiety. The NPP is going to reach peak levels within 2 or 3 weeks. So why did you start getting anxiety after 6 weeks, but you didn't get
Yeah,
anxiety at week 3, week 4, week
yeah,
5?
yeah.
So that tells me that there's maybe something going on. But I mean, is it the steroid? Is it that NPP gives you anxiety after 6 weeks, or is it just something's going on in your life, or maybe there's something else that you're stacking with it? A lot of times we
Yes.
blame
We
Equipoise and
change the stack as we go along. We've changed the diet
but
as
I
we've
mean,
gone
a lot of
along.
times with NPP, people will blame NPP for everything. They'll blame it for, oh, my dick doesn't work. Oh, it's NPP's fault. Oh, I have anxiety. It's NPP's fault. What else are you running with it? Oh, I'm running Anadrol with it. I'm running testosterone with it. Well, how come you're not blaming those steroids? I'm running
I read that
Superdrol with
red
it.
light. It said be peaceful. I stubbed my
Yeah.
toenail this morning
So I mean, it's very easy. Again, this is another example where people blame the steroid,
by
but they
association. Yeah.
but they don't blame the other steroids in the stack. The next one became jealous and insecure on it. This happens with any steroid. This can happen with any steroid, and NPP is the one that wouldn't cause this as much. So if you're running testosterone and NPP together, I would blame this on the testosterone. I wouldn't blame it on the NPP because
Mm.
testosterone is androgenic. It's much more strong, it's
Yes.
more powerful,
Yes.
where it's going to
Yes.
cause more of those aggression side effects, which ties in the next one, aggression and rage increase. NPP is a mild steroid. I mean, it's not that androgenic in the body. So if you're using it with another steroid, let's say you're using it with tren or using it with testosterone or using it with Debol or Anadrol or any of these, those are the ones that are going to cause the
Yeah,
rage.
let me touch on that
Go ahead.
briefly, Steve. And I see it more with the younger user, and I'm talking about. I'm big on this one. I don't like under 25 use of steroid, full stop. But that's by the by. So, and I also mentioned earlier on how transformative for some people using TRT can be when you've been low T levels for years. You go on TRT and you, oh, fuck, man, it's not 20 years off. I feel fucking fantastic. Um, so, what you will sometimes see, and the aggression and rage is a great example, is that you've, especially for younger users who haven't quite learned enough about life and experience of life to manage certain attributes about themselves, which is what we were looking at really. I would argue that Steve and I are the other way around. I would say that Steve and I have calmed the fuck down once we got strong, calmed the fuck down once we got muscular because our confidence increased. Our ability to quote unquote kick ass didn't suddenly make us great fighters or anything silly like that, but we kind of probably felt like we could handle ourselves. So the idea becomes the opposite for me and Steve, becoming more muscular, becoming stronger, knowing awareness of our power. For example, that Steve and I have both benched in excess of 400 pounds. Doesn't make us great boxers, but I would argue that we could, if we actually connected with someone, the power that we can put into a punch could be significant. Same with overhead pressing, tricep exercises, and so on. Doesn't make us faster, better athletically, and so on. Although Steve's actually more inclined to that than I am, and so on. So look, if you're younger, you get leaner, you get stronger, you suddenly start benching 2 plates, 2.5 plates, 3 plates. Your aggression or your quote unquote feeling cocky, the way that you walk into a bar with a swagger might increase. I would argue that you should calm the fuck down, motherfucker. You're not impervious to bullets, but you might feel like you are. And I would perhaps suggest here, Steve, that when it comes to, and we've seen this not just with NPP, but with other steroids, the person says, and I quote, when I'm on steroids, I feel like this, I feel like that. And a lot of these aggression and rage, no, no. What's happened? Steve, we've all been young. Many of our listeners will have had this experience of going into a bar or going into a pub or a club out on the scene in the various different places during certain weeks at college and university where you go into some places, you're in a great
Yeah.
mood, the
Well,
girls are in a great
I
mood,
mean,
and someone's been
yeah.
an arsehole. Yeah, yeah,
I'm sure this happens in Britain too, but in America, you always hear stories from people. They're coming home from the game late at night, and they're like, "Oh, let's stop and grab a beer." So they stop
yeah.
in the bar. It's like a biker bar, but they don't really know that. So they walk in there, and they look at someone the wrong way, and that person jumps them and starts kicking their ass. Well, are those maniacs that are in the biker bar on NPP? Are they on
Yeah,
Equipoise?
we used to have
Or
one
are
here in
they
the
just
UK, Steve.
fucking crazy dickheads
Certain
with no
alcohols,
brains who do
yeah,
nothing
yeah.
but want to fight? Like, you know what I'm saying? It's just like,
Certain beers, Stella Artois, which is actually ironically French, was supposed to be one that made you want to fight. I never really liked Stella, so it was not a big thing for me. I think there's a couple of others. A 6% beer was fine, but an 8% beer made me more aggressive. No, it just meant you drunk more alcohol than you perhaps intended to. So the aggression and rage increase. No, what you might be feeling again is the higher levels of testosterone while you're on cycle. And again, I don't think it's specific to NPP. The last one here, Steve, heart race and anxiety was way up. It's similar to the one that we've talked about with the heart in the morning, heart
Yeah.
racing and
So
paranoid.
this one,
So yeah,
let me give my idea on this one.
yeah, yeah,
Look,
yeah,
and
yeah.
if you gain a rapid amount of weight quickly, whether you're
Yes,
on or off steroids, you can go. And I've seen this a lot with skinny guys. They're 150 pounds. They're like, man, I want to gain like 20 pounds. So they go and they fucking eat like 7,000 calories a day. They
yeah.
go lift weights. They go to the buffet every day. They're eating McDonald's every day. They're eating Big Macs, cheeseburgers every fucking day. And they gain a shit ton of weight very quickly. Of course, that's going to cause your heart to race and your blood
Oh
pressure to
man,
go up
of
and all that
course.
issues. So if you're on NPP and again, you're stacking it with testosterone, you're not using an AI, you're getting a lot of water weight quickly, which will happen when you
Yeah,
stack NPP with testosterone without an AI, then of course you're going to have your heart start racing and stuff. So these are things, that are true, but these are things where you're just not running the compound correctly. So let's get into how to run these correctly. We're going to talk about Euro
yes,
Pharmacies, Equipoise, and NPP. So let me give you a baseline of both of them. So Euro Pharmacies, they have excellent Equipoise, they have excellent NPP, nandrolone phenylpropionate. And look, Equipoise dosage, it can range from anywhere from 200 milligrams up to 600 milligrams a week. Average dose is around 400 milligrams for a normal person. We see professionals run it much higher, but most of you don't even have to worry about that. NPP, 150 milligrams a week up to 400 milligrams a week with the average dose around 300 milligrams a week. And they both stack well with Euro Pharma testosterone. Now, one of my favorite stacks with Equipoise, and I'll let you talk about a bulker with NPP that you like, Mobster. But with
yeah,
me, with
yeah.
Equipoise, my favorite is Equipoise and T-Bowl together. And they're a great cardio and endurance stack. And my favorite way to do it is Equipoise 300 milligrams a week and T-Bowl 20 milligrams a day. And let me tell you something. If you run that and you have the mentality in your mind, oh, I'm going to get anxiety, I'm going to get anxiety, then you're probably going to get anxiety. It's a placebo effect. But I've run this stack many times. I've run it when I
Yeah.
was younger. I've run it now. I've never had a lick of anxiety. If anything, I've been more energetic, more good mood, more endurance.
Yes,
So I feel
yes.
great on this stack. So if you get anxiety on this, then there's something with you where you're prone to anxiety. But I guarantee you, if you're not someone who's prone to anxiety, you don't have to take medication for anxiety. You'll be completely fine on this stack. It's a mild stack and it works fucking great for endurance. If you like to do a lot of active stuff like I do, it's a great option for you. Mom, sir, why don't you talk about an MPP?
Let me touch on the Bulker there, Stephen, just as an example, the way that I felt on the Bulker. I've used multiple times, as regular listeners to this show will know, my favorite Bulker, which has worked for me almost up to the most recent one, Steve, and my heaviest, 336 pounds, was a fantastically short following a cut cycle, and that was the heaviest I've ever been in my life, 153 kilograms, would be Sustanon, 250 milligram, and Euro Pharmacies does a 500 milligram option, which I actually have here in my little stash, and or nandrolone decadam. Of course, nandrolone phenylpropionate is the shorter version, the shorter acting ester version of decadam. And look, Steve's quite correct in terms of sentiment, how I felt. Oh, listen, I'm as strong as fuck when I've done those things. I'm the size of a motherfucking house. In terms of my anxiety, non-existent, almost chilled, Steve. I felt good. The pumps are fucking amazing. I'm pushing more weight than I've ever done when I use those cycles, including the most recent one. I didn't put much weight on, but I've done an all-time PB, 925-pound Hatfield squat. I even thought about putting 1,000 pound on the bar. So for me, I know I'm going to be strong, and that sort of degree of confidence, etc., knowing you're going to get a great response, knowing you're going to hit big numbers, that is not something that's going to give me anxiety. Quite the opposite. In terms of running the stack and cycle, I've done, as I said previously, for my biggest ever body weight was a cut, going from 327 to 320, and then recomping back to 327, and then straight afterwards, 4 weeks into the bulker, which put me at 336 pounds. So I think my body bounced back, to say the least. On the last one, I think I hit around 330 pounds. I'm a bit less than that at the minute. And I ran it for 8 weeks. In fact, I even slightly upped the amounts I was taking. Didn't do me much better than the combined total of around 1,050 milligrams a week. And I think that also included a low dose, 25 milligrams of provarin per day. So, yeah, look, my biggest issue when I've put bulk on in the past, Steve, which I wasn't trying to keep, and I've said this on other shows, going for 280 to 300 pounds, was fitness, not anxiety. Walking up the goddamn stairs, my little 2 up, 2 down that I lived in at the time, would my heart, my lungs would let me know that I'd gained 20 pounds, and I would gain 20 pounds very, very quickly. So that was more of an issue. The fact that my body hadn't got used to this massive gain in a very, very short period of time that I wasn't trying to keep. I was only doing it to bulk up for competitions to get as strong as possible. I wasn't trying to retain that body weight afterwards. Ironically, I'm bigger now, but that's by the by. And my body just hadn't got used to it. So walking around, walking up and down stairs, eating, and so on and so forth. And the libido was good, always is relatively good, all things considered, on cycle versus off cycle, which is not that bad. So no broken dick or anything like that, and so on and so forth, Steve. So yeah, look, for me, these things, again, individualistic experiences. If you take 100 athletes, you're going to get different response. So we must remember that I might be taking one dose, Steve might be taking another dose. Steve will be, as we do this show, leaner than me. His response should be different. It's too easy looking online at these things, Steve, and kind of generalizing in a way that's non-specific. And when we see these pieces of information, we're not looking at all the other things that might affect how someone feels, from diet, body condition, age, and so on. Look, why do we talk about Euro Pharmacies so much? I say again and again and again, Steve, they are my daily go-to. You have places you go for food that you like. You have places you like to take your car to be fixed. For me, Euro Pharmacies is like that. That I can get what I need at great prices, especially when they're doing sales via the resellers. I know that they have products that I've used and enjoy and get great success from. And then there's things that we talk about multiple times, Steve, with these tests. So talk a little bit about your own Euro Pharmacies experience before we finish the show.
Yeah, and there's a reason why gym rats and professional bodybuilders trust Euro Pharma, and they use Euro Pharma. It's one of the top brands in the world, and it's one of those. Look, it's one of those brands that you buy. What you buy is what you get, and the
Yes,
dosing is correct, and everything. The
yes.
shipping is fast. The customer service is great, and they have
We've learned
everything
to
you need.
trust the products that
Yeah.
they produce, Steve. We learned to know that our experience is going to be solid. Steve and I both agree on this 100%. Listen, guys, it'd be very easy for both Steve and I to appear biased in this particular regards for various reasons. So what I would always have you do is verify. Verify what we said during the show. Go away and double check. Think about what we said. Think about why people said things and not maybe connected the dots and not use logic. Verify what Steve and I say about Euro Pharmacies. Come onto the forums and see if other people are using Pharmacies products and getting the same results that Steve and I get and having the same great experience and the same great customer service and so on and so forth, Steve. So, yeah, absolutely, guys. Don't forget, as before, let people know if you like this show, let us know in the comments. Click like, click subscribe. Please, 100% click share. Let people know that there's these two guys out there putting out great information via Evolutionary so that the information can be shared out to other people and they can have the great experience that you've had as well. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.